Okay, so I had a slight microphone issue and I recorded a video without sound, so I've reset the page and I'll try this one more time with an actual microphone plugged in instead of only halfway plugged in and not picking up. So a little peek behind the scenes there, guys. I wanted to take a moment and show you one of the more important pieces to this puzzle. Before I even get into explaining what everything is and how it works, I just wanted this as its own separate video because 9 times out of 10, if you are using a pressure-sensitive device like a Wacom tablet, touch-sensitive screen, Cintiq, any of those types of things, there is a very specific tool that you want to have going on. And before I do anything, let me explain what I'm doing here. By going to Window and Arrange, I have the ability to create new windows and for the same document. So now if I were to tap and create something, it happens on both windows because these are two windows to the same document. And the reason that this is useful is that I have a second screen that I use when working with brushes. So I'm just going to drag this window down to that screen, which is a little bit of a mystery down here, but that lets me actually draw on things. So if I were to just take our precious brush, B on the B key, and make a stroke, voila, we have a stroke. Now, here's the key. If I were to come back up here with the brush, I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. I've come back up here with the brush and paint with this scale, notice that it remains static. It's the same. There's nothing interesting happening. Now, the difference between static is dynamic, so the question becomes, how do we create a dynamic brush with this? Well, before we get into all of that, which we'll start on the next video, I wanted to show you one key item for if you have a pen and a key item for if you're just using a mouse. So first, the pen. Let's start with the horrifying snail tube. So here we have this horrifying snail tube that we created. And at the moment, regardless of if I paint with my Wacom tablet here, whoops, don't want to do that, with my Wacom tablet or with my mouse, it has the same effect. So I'm just going to create a new layer real quick so we can paint on it. Now, what I want, if I have a pen that has pressure sensitivity, is to have it react if I press harder or lighter. Now, I can set this for a lot of things, but 9 times out of 10, when you're just creating a brush to test, you're going to want to have the size be pressure sensitive. Now, this isn't a requirement for this assignment. This is just a pro tip for life. In general, it will make things a lot easier as you go out. You do not have to use this for each and every brush or even any of your brushes. It's not a requirement. But throughout your life, you'll probably end up using this a lot. So I'm just going to pop over to brush settings. And by default, I'm in the brush tip shape, and this is a file menu. This is a editable item. It has your spacing. I'm just going to leave this at the 10%. I'm going to pop down to shape dynamics, and I'll explain what all this is in the next few videos. But right now, I'm just going to go to size jitter at the top of the screen, and I'm going to leave it at 0%, and I'll explain why in the next video. And I'm going to set the control from off to pen pressure. Notice how the preview changed down here. Now, what's going on is the pressure that I have on the brush, if I press lightly, then hard, and then light again, will change the size. So all of a sudden, I have a dynamic brush. I have one that's responsive to what I'm working on. And in this case, the amount of pressure goes from very, very small percent to essentially 1% on the screen. And if I were to just use the mouse on the screen, 1% to the whole size of the original stamp. That's what I'm trying to say there. Now, if I use the stamp capture brush, if I use the mouse to paint with this capture brush, it will be at its full original capture brush size, which we could see if we pop over to brushes, or if we look up over here, we're at 240. That's the size that we've got going on. So if you have a pen, that is the go-to place for just getting it to respond. And that will be under size, that will be under shape dynamics, size jitter, pen pressure, but set it to 0%. And I'll show you more about that in a bit. Now, if you have a mouse, there are a ton of tools to use. So you can also use these with a stylus. But just as a quick demonstration, notice that however we move this, it's kind of like a game of solitaire that's been won on an old Windows machine, boop, 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 it just goes in the same direction. So there are a lot of ways that we can move it, but one of the common ways that I see a lot of is under, again, shape dynamics. This time we're not using the horrifying snail tube, we're using the cute snail selected so that we can see the antenna are always up regardless of what I'm doing on the screen. Under brush settings, shape dynamics, instead of size jitter, I'm going to go to angle jitter, and this is just a control of the angle. Now the angle is normally just controlled under brush tip shape. You can change the angle by rotating this structure over here, and we'll see the snail rotating. Or you can go in and set in a specific percentage. But there's another thing you can do to make it responsive. Under shape dynamics, you have angle jitter. I'm going to set the control to direction. I could also set it to initial direction if I prefer, but I'm just going to do direction for this. Now if I go left to right, the antenna are on the top, but if I start going right to left, the antenna are now on the bottom. And if I do a circle clockwise, you can see that, or sorry, counterclockwise, you can see that the antenna are on the inside. Let me switch the color here. But if I go counterclockwise, the antenna are on the outside. So the angle is changing according to the direction that I'm going, which makes this a much more responsive brush, especially if you have a mouse. It's also, of course, more responsive. I'm going to flip the color by, or I'm going to set the colors to default by pressing D on the keyboard. So I'll have black again. If I use the if I use the stylus instead of the mouse, you'll see that it is changing according to the direction of the stroke again. So that's what's happening there. That's under shape dynamics, and that's angle jitter direction. Now you can combine it with other things. For example, I can do the size, and I'll set this to pen pressure for now. And now you can see that it is a much more dynamic brush. It's much more responsive. But if I only had the mouse, I wouldn't have a pen. Maybe I'd do a fade instead. And this gives me a fade percentage here. And now if I paint, you can see it flies off immediately. Perhaps it would be better to have a much greater fade. I believe this is in pixels. So you can have it kind of pop out. Now this is good if you're doing effects and you need it to be the same going on. Not super useful if you're painting, because all of a sudden it's like you're running out of ink. But it's something else that's there. Anyway, we'll talk about that one more. I personally would not use fade. I've seen people use it, so I just wanted to say it. But again, the two main things I wanted to talk about here: shape dynamics, size jitter, pen pressure. Shape dynamics, angle jitter, direction. Those two things are frequently all you need when you're first designing a brush to start getting a response so that you can paint to your heart's desire. That said, there are so many more options. Let's start covering those in the next video and talk about what a jitter is, what these percentages are, like what's all happening here. See you next video.